Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hey there, Zoe here, and interesting stuff happening on planet Human today. There's a little news article I read in one of my favorite e-zines on Solein, S-O-L-E-I-N. It's coming out of Singapore, and it is a protein powder. So you say, It is made out of air, water, renewable electricity, and microbes. What the? So they're making protein out of air, water, and a little bit of electricity and a little bit of microbes. And apparently it tastes good. What could this mean? What could this mean? Well, if we get a new source of protein that's divorced from agriculture, whether it's plant-based protein or animal-based protein, one that comes out of the air with a bit of water and some microbes, this could actually be a massive solution to feeding the planet. And also a massive solution for food in space, by the way. So I'm very interested from my science fiction point of view. So interesting one to keep an eye on. Will this kind of protein replace or supplement our animal and plant protein production? Stay tuned. On Planet Zoe, yahoo! I had a birthday. It was my birthday on the 1st of July. And I love birthdays because they're always an opportunity to reflect on what's happened in the last 12 months and where am I up to in my life journey. So I'm not going to give you all the nitty gritty ins and outs. I might save that for a solo episode actually to talk about my 53 trips around the sun. There you go. Gave away my age. I don't feel 53. I'm not even sure what 53 is supposed to feel like, but I feel good and I'm excited to still be here. That's for sure. All right. So birthday news. In the meantime, my question for you this week is, how can we improve decision-making? And my guest today is the amazing Dr. Constance Dierickx. She is the author of an excellent book called Meta Leadership: How to See What Others Don't and Make Great Decisions. She is an expert on governance and mergers, has won the Consultant of the Year award, and is highly sought after to helping leaders make better decisions, including how to run mergers better, etc. We have an excellent conversation, high-level leadership concepts with practical application. So without further ado, let's get into it. Well, all the way from Atlanta, welcome to the show, Constance Dierickx.
Thank you, Zoe. I am really thrilled to be with you. I think we're going to have some fun today.
Oh, I hope so. Talking about leadership is always fun. Well, actually, no, it's not. Sometimes it's really hard.
No, it isn't. Right.
It's like leadership is not always fun. Often it is challenging. Talking about it can be fun, though. So my first question for you is really about how the heck did you get into this field and interested in what you call meta leadership? And then the part of that question is, what is meta leadership?
Oh, boy. There you go. Yeah. So I got interested in decision making and the significance and the variety of decision making when I was a stockbroker. Long time ago, I was haunted, and to this day remain haunted still, by why smart people make stupid decisions. And your listeners are probably familiar with this phenomenon. They may have clients, customers, colleagues, family members.
Themselves.
Who are smart people and themselves. Yes. Well, it's harder to recognize it right in ourselves. Hindsight is good for that. So I began studying decision science and I wanted to talk to my colleagues about it. They were not interested. So I spent time in a bookstore reading about decision science and business and economics and psychology. And these fields had not yet come together in a way that is as widely known or was as widely known as it is today. Kahneman hadn't published his famous article on heuristics and biases under uncertainty, which is the most cited article in science ever. Certainly not his book. And so there wasn't a way to merge these things. So I went back to school. And when I came out of school with a doctorate in clinical psychology, I knew I wanted to somehow figure out a way to use what I knew about human behavior and business to benefit leaders. So that's how that happened, a bit of a checkered past, if you will. And what I began to notice over the years about leadership and the way it's described in books, talked about management training, tends to be very specific to certain things. This is how you manage. This is how you give feedback. This is how you do strategy. Well, there's, a couple million ways to do that. This is how you plan for the future. This is how you handle IT or do an analyst call. And these things are all specific. And these are all important things. They're very important. But because I work with boards and CEOs, what I began to notice was sometimes they would reach for knowledge or some experience or a consultant on a particular thing, and it was very specific. And I noticed that really great leaders actually sit back a bit. They don't lean in so much anymore. They lean out and they think about how they're going to make decisions. They're a bit more process oriented, and they're very good at discriminating between what's urgent, what's not urgent. I think we're going to get into a little bit of that later on, talking about crisis. And so I began to conceptualize this as a meta level of awareness. So very much like metacognition or metaphysics or meta-analysis. And so I came up with this idea of meta leadership and what would it be comprised of. That was a big category. So the categories are thinking, emotion, and behavior. It's really easy if you think of it that way. It's three things.
Yeah. Thinking, emotion, and behavior. And we will dive into some aspects of that. I'm curious rewinding the clock. So when you were a stockbroker thinking about why do smart people make stupid decisions, did you have a hypothesis around that at the beginning?
Yes.
What was your hypothesis?
I thought they were stupid. I thought these people looked smart and had education, but were really stupid. And that was very oversimplified. I was looking at the behavior and concluding that these people couldn't have been as smart as you would have expected. But I came to understand through my very early study that human beings, we're not calculators. We don't make decisions without emotion being involved, for one thing. And we have recent neuroscience that demonstrates this clearly. Where you can't separate yourself from your emotion. You don't have to let it have the driver's seat. Don't hand it the keys unless you're out having, choosing an ice cream flavor, then be my guest. So that was my early hypothesis. And I later, through my research, became disabused of that notion. But what that process of changing my mind did was a very early sort of self-guided experience of scientific thinking, which requires you to let go of what you thought yesterday when you have new information that shows you you're mistaken. And great leaders do that. They're sort of little scientists or big scientists, if you will.
That's actually really hard, isn't it, though?
It is.
When you live with what you think is a truth for a long time, and this is associated not just to belief, but whole value systems. Like if this is your way that you operate because you think, for example, that one belief that you think smart people are stupid when they make bad decisions, that feels like a truth. And then your brain goes, let's find evidence of that. And it just reinforces in this reinforcement loop. How do you break out of that? And you just segued a little bit into the being little scientists. How do we make that easier for people to question their thinking and let go of these truths, which seem so important and so essential and so non-negotiable and rock solid, and you get some information that challenges that? Because not everybody will go, oh, that's new information. I'm going to change my beliefs. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's hard. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is precisely why organizational culture is so powerful. Because not only is it my belief, but if you and I share the belief and we're running a business together, then we're going to reinforce that belief in one another, and we're going to celebrate the behaviors where that belief is manifest, and we're going to look down on the behaviors where it is not. So one of the ways to do it is to get the heck away from, get out of your bubble. We talk about this in the States with politics, that, we're in these bubbles where if you're not in my bubble, you're wrong and you're probably stupid. And if you only knew better and wised up, you would think like I do. And so it takes a level of intellectual honesty with yourself to be able to do that. It takes the ability to be a skeptic, but not necessarily a critic. There's a level of dispassion, which I've learned over my life, you can develop and strengthen in yourself. I can sort of call on this ability in myself if I become aware that I'm sort of, tilting at windmills for whatever reason. I can say, wait a minute, and stop myself. And I wasn't born this way. I've learned to do this. And I think great leaders learn to be good skeptics, not critics, and particularly with themselves.
I think it's so important because, this is really hard work because it is so much more comfortable to stay in your bubble with people who think like you, act like you, have the same values. It's reassuring. It's easy. There's a shorthand in terms of, you get me, I get you. It's all good. And as you say, getting out of the bubble to confront the people that you think are wrong and stupid. It's like you have to ask yourself the question, why do I want to do that? Because it's uncomfortable and I already think they're wrong and stupid. So what's the bigger purpose why to help leaders get over the discomfort or the yuckiness of having to do that?
It's because they want to be extraordinary.
That's the reason why they should do that?
Yeah, they want to be extraordinary. They want to lead an extraordinary organization. They want to achieve extraordinary results. And you get ordinary when you do the ordinary and you don't question yourself or what you're doing or what you're thinking or the context in which you're operating. I think great leaders are motivated by success, but not only personal success, that's a piece of it, but success in some sort of mission-driven way, or whatever word people want to put on it, is it allows them to be more or less agnostic about method, but absolutely fixed on outcome. Where are we going? What does it mean? Okay.
That's a pretty good motivation to be extraordinary. That's worth feeling uncomfortable and getting out of your bubble, I reckon.
Well, I've done it multiple times in my life. I quit my job as a stockbroker when I was earning 40% of my family's income. I went to graduate school in the longest PhD program in clinical psych in the U.S. That was a big deal. And what I've learned over time is, at least people that are like me, once you do something really challenging and you do it, and you succeed, you get to the end, you reach your goal, it's very reinforcing. And it teaches you, I can do hard things. I can do those hard things. It makes it easier to do the next one.
Yeah. So in which case, it is good to have evidence of doing the hard things and having a reward associated with it. Sometimes you do the hard things and get slapped in the face.
True. Oh yeah. These are fake front teeth. No, I'm joking. But I've certainly made mistakes, gotten my teeth kicked in, gotten my feelings hurt. Absolutely. And, sometimes this saying about, it's a learning experience. Yeah, sometimes what you learn is the other person was a jerk and to stay away from them. And that's a learning. It's not always that we made a mistake, other than maybe we put ourselves in a situation that wasn't the best.
Yeah. In which case you're testing our hypothesis. Is that person stupid and a jerk? Oh, yes, they are.
Oh, what a terrible combination, right? Stupid and a jerk. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole concept of meta leadership is rising above the fray, getting off the dance floor. We're going to use that metaphor, and understanding the beliefs. So you said behavior, thinking, and emotion, right? One of the things you ask leaders to do is to start to challenge their beliefs. So one of the questions you have in your book is, what ways do my beliefs influence my decision making? So this is a reflective question. How do you get leaders to understand or discover what their actual beliefs are?
Well, the way I do it is in conversation with them, but anyone can do this on their own. It often takes, in the beginning at least, being prompted to do it by someone like me, sitting in your office saying, what's your evidence for that? What makes you think that? It's inquiring. It's not being satisfied with conceptual answers or attributions. So I'll give you an example. So a lot of leaders, when they're having a problem with another person and they tell me about it, they describe the other person in terms of the labels they've put on them rather than the behaviors that they've observed in the person. And sometimes it's a mix of the two, but if someone says to me, oh God, he is not at all strategic, I say, well, what makes you think that? And they go, usually they need a minute, right? Take a beat.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll say, have they done anything, even if it was minor, that was strategic? Did they bring something to you in a strategic way? Did they take a strategic look? And if they say, no, never. And I say, well, being strategic is part of that job, correct? And they say, yes. And I say, well, person might be in the wrong job. So it's questioning the basis on which you believe something and doing it respectfully so it's safe enough. Some beliefs are very hard to assail. I don't believe in vaccines for COVID. And so therefore, I'm not requiring people in my company to be vaccinated. Okay, well, I've worked in public health, and my dissertation was on a public health topic. So I could wade into that, but I don't think that's appropriate. Usually it's more business-related kinds of conversations, but we can all do this ourselves.
That's an interesting one because that's an example of getting into an echo chamber. So if you did ask the question, what evidence have you got towards that? Often during the COVID vaccination conversations, it's like, here's a list of my experts. Here's a list of my bodies of research. And they did have evidence to put forward. Now, quite often, if you pick away at that a little bit, you discover that the health professionals were not that well established or not established at all, and the research was flawed. Is that correct in terms of how you might dig into that a little bit?
Yes. One thing I learned doing a residency in an academic medical center and being a patient, of physicians, is that many physicians, never mind ordinary human beings, haven't learned how to analyze scientific studies. So you might hear something on the popular news that says the Journal of the American Medical Association says that brushing your teeth is associated with lung cancer. And everybody goes, oh my God, teeth brushing causes lung cancer. Oh my God. Well, it is actually a correlation that was observed. But a correlation, as you know, means that things come together. It doesn't mean that one thing caused the other. It happens that people that smoke tend to brush their teeth more often.
Because they have stinky breath.
But we in no way think that teeth brushing causes lung cancer.
Right.
But we do know that smoking does.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really good observation. So one of your key premises then is to be more of a scientist when it comes to investigating your own thinking. So alongside with that, one of the questions you ask leaders to reflect on is, what habits of decision-making do I possess? How do you put an X-ray to that? How do you actually map out your decision-making habits?
Well, you look at a decision that you made that was important enough to take an X-ray, right? They're not all important enough to get out your scalpel and your X-ray machine. And, I ask them to think about a decision that they made. And I ask them, what information did you have? Where did you get the information? What was your source for that information? And to think, slow yourself down just a little bit and say, oh, did someone tell me that? Did I read it? Where is that? I ask them to think about, what are the habits that the organization has? What are the expectations that other people have of them in that situation? If they had gone out and asked people, what am I about to decide? What would the group have said back? What was that cacophony? It tells you something about the organizational cultural context. I asked them to think about who they typically talk to before they make a decision, because you find that very senior leaders, because they're so busy, I think this happens a lot, they have their go-to group. I call them the usual suspects. And, they'll go to the COO or the CFO or whatever. They'll avoid the CHRO. You get your favorite people. And, especially I find CEOs that have trouble with people and relationships, the CHRO is the one they don't go to, because that person might be the one with the most skill to help them, but it's also the most challenging. And then after we have those conversations a few times, again, it's something people can do on their own. It's a little harder. But when you have 2 or 3 examples or 4 examples, then I ask them to look at the patterns. What are the patterns in what you're doing? So I know, for example, I'm extremely influenced by my husband and my habits of decision making. If I'm making a decision about a large expense, I don't do that without talking to him. And I know that he has a ton of influence over what I do. Now, I've decided that's okay with me, but you see what I mean. In another circumstance, that much influence might not be okay with me, but he's very smart. He's also hilarious. And he has my best interest at heart, so I can trust him. And that's what leaders need. They need people that are smart enough and have strong enough character and independence that they'll say, okay, Constance, I think you're looking at this sideways. And then the leader will listen to that because they respect and trust the person. Those relationships are enormously helpful.
And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of CEOs value a good executive coach so much. Because if the executive coach is doing their job well, they'll say, hang on a minute, you're looking at that sideways. Or this is some of the things I'm hearing and what you're observing, and this is can actually put the mirror up around the thinking process and decision-making process. And I think your handful of questions, like even just what makes you think that, what's the evidence for that, what a circuit breaker that is. And that's a useful takeaway for listeners immediately. It's like, oh yeah, let's just pause for a second and think about that conclusion. And I think that's a really useful thing to do. I sat on a decision recently for about 6 weeks, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't the emotion making the decision, that they actually had a practical element to it. And in the end, I made the decision, and there was still emotion in it, and it was not the only driver. So we talk a little bit about that, like how emotion and discomfort sits in strategy and how we can tease that out. Like, what's the relationship between discomfort, emotion, and strategy?
Everything. So, we like to make fun of Sigmund Freud in our modern world, but he was right about a couple things, especially that human beings don't like anxiety. We don't like discomfort. We can say discomfort because anxiety sounds so clinical, right? But when you are contemplating a decision, a strategic decision, do we acquire this company or not? Do we shed this line of business or not? Do we go into a new geography or not? The process of examining that strategic choice will reveal risks if it's done well, and that creates discomfort in people. And so just acknowledging that is super helpful. However, when the discomfort gets in the driver's seat, that's emotion getting in the driver's seat, right? But we have to recognize that persuading people who are anxious or feel very intensely uncomfortable or are terrified of risk is not done with logic. It has to be done with emotion. And so leaders need to learn to talk in a different way about strategy, paint the picture of a bright future that makes the pain or the discomfort of whatever seem worth it. And if it does, maybe it isn't. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it isn't. But I have a client, a CEO I'm working with right now, who's in the process of doing this very thing. And he's very good at figuring out how things will happen. He's a great delegator. He hires great people. I mean, he's got a lot of things going for him. He's not great at using language to get people excited, to use positive emotion. He tries to stamp out the negative emotion with logic, but that doesn't work at all.
That's really helpful. And being great storytellers and great Imagineers is, I think, essential for leadership.
I love that word. Yeah.
I just made that up. Somebody else has probably used it before, though.
Yeah, it's a Disney word.
Imagineers.
Walt Disney said he wanted to have Imagineers. He wanted creative engineers.
There you go.
There, yeah, you're a genius, Zoe.
Thank you. I'll take that.
Yeah, of course.
All right. I've got a couple of really other juicy questions. And before we do that, we're going to go to the Fast Five. Are you ready?
Oh, no. Okay, sure.
So, Fast Five, here we go. Number one, what is the future tech you most want now?
I want an app that runs alongside everything we all do, like Grammarly, that is a fact checker.
A fact checker app. Oh, I like that. That's awesome. Okay, number two, best tip you ever got for leadership?
To be an explorer in your own territory.
Oh, I love that. That's one of my key principles too, is that we need to Yeah. I have a mantra that I've been sharing in my keynotes and my teachings, which is explore, map, adapt. And the explorer mindset is central to the whole premise of what I think leaders need to be doing.
Yes. I have the innocent anthropologist back there on that credenza.
The innocent anthropologist?
Anthropologist. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm an anthropology fiend.
Cool.
But it's surprising how many leaders don't explore their own territory. They rely on reports, but personal experience is priceless.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. So number three, what's one problem at work you'd love to wave a magic wand and have it be fixed right now?
Indecision. Not mine. I'm super decisive, but clients procrastinate about important decisions, and sometimes it turns into a crisis.
Yeah. Okay. And if they had the tools of doing this reflexive and reflective thinking about their thinking, that would help.
Yes, that would absolutely help. Also, if they had me sitting across the table from them, because my silver bullet is if I tell someone it's time to let go of that CFO or whatever, and they've been ignoring me for a year, I will lean over and say, ignore me at your peril. And they know it's just time to shift into a different mode. And it usually leads to a deeper conversation. Doesn't always mean they do what I'm advising, but recently an executive told me about advice of mine he ignored, and it cost him his job. And he now tells people publicly, Constance told me not to do that, and I did it anyway, and look what happened.
Yeah.
He's brave.
Yeah, that is brave. Brave public confessions. All right, number four, thumbs up or down. Who is a leader that's doing something right, or who is something that's doing wrong that we can all learn from?
Well, I have two examples of right. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, who has done a magnificent job leading the company, and Mary Barra, who's the CEO of General Motors. They have things in common. And that is that they're very capable, they're very brave, they face issues head on, they're also strategic and customer focused, and neither of them has a bunch of drama surrounding them. You don't see stories in the New York Times about shenanigans.
They're shenanigan free.
They're shenanigan free. Well, let's cross our fingers. I mean, they've each been in their role quite a long time. So hopefully the shenanigan free zone is reality for them, that they just live their lives in such a way that, they don't do bad stuff. It's kind of simple, really.
Interesting. So I'm making little connections in my brain around that. Some of the shenanigans are related to the seduction of power. And if you've read Dacher Keltner's book, The Paradox of Power, he talks about how power can derail us a little bit and turn us into impulsive idiots. So perhaps Tim Cook and Mary Barra have managed to avoid the traps of power. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that people that have a healthy sense of who they are and are achievement oriented for the company as well as for themselves, they're less seduced by the power. They tend to be authoritative, but not authoritarian. A more authoritarian type, the chainsaw Al type, those people tend to be troubled. And someone who's troubled and who's insecure or doesn't know who they are is a lot more susceptible. I actually had a patient, I hadn't thought of this in years, I had a patient when I was a resident who had been a con artist for most of his career. I'm using air quotes. And he said to me one day, he said, "You're not going to get taken in by a con artist." And I said, "Really? How do you know?" And he goes, "Because you're not trying to get something for nothing." He said, "Con artists look for people that are trying to get something for nothing." And he said, "You're not." And it's true. I was on a train one day and, well, I won't tell you the story. It'll take us too far astray. But anyway, my patient, who was an expert on con artists.
So that I can't con you. Yeah.
Well, that's probably not true. I could probably be conned, but probably not as easily as if I were power hungry.
I like that as a repellent, though. Do you want something for nothing? So be mindful of being seduced by the something for nothing.
Yeah, I think that was really, really insightful on his part. Made him a good con artist.
All right. Number 5 in the Fast 5, which is longish 5, which is, do you have a favorite leadership book or podcast?
Well, I'm a podcast junkie. There's so many. I like Tim Ferriss's, which isn't necessarily a leadership podcast, but he has thought leaders and business leaders on. I would say the book that is enduring is Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I mean, if you don't even read the book, you just think, what got me here won't get me there. It takes us right back to what we were talking about earlier, about having the mind of a scientist and being willing to let go of what you thought last week because now you have new and better information.
Great. Well, thank you for playing the Fast 5.
Yeah, it was longer because I kept describing.
No, that's okay. I think that's the
you were
going to
ask me. Are you going to ask me about good, bad leaders? Let's see.
That was, thumbs up or thumbs down. So if we got your thumbs up, we'll take your thumbs down. Have you got some thumbs down?
Okay, I've got some thumbs down. I have 2. One is Andy Owens, sadly, female CEO of Herman Miller, which is Miller Knoll. They're office furniture people. That's how they're best known, I think. Her company isn't paying bonuses this year, and she was asked in, I guess it was a town hall meeting, it was recorded, about how people were supposed to stay motivated when they weren't getting a bonus. And she said, I'm paraphrasing, you can visit Pity City, but you can't live there.
Wow, that's a very compassionate response.
Yeah, that's a woman who let her emotion get the best of her. But the other CEO that I want to name, and ironically, 2 days before this interview, Wells Fargo's back in the news. They're paying out $1 billion in losses. This is reported in the New York Times, is where I read it. They're paying out $1 billion in losses from the issues they had with forcing clients to open accounts they didn't need or forging documents, etc. And John Stumpf was the CEO at the time, and it didn't occur to him to question results in the retail banking division of Wells Fargo that were outsized compared to their peer group, similar sized banks. And so I like to use that as an example with my clients of good news is great, but you want to understand how the good results were achieved. Because in the best case scenario, you learn how to perpetuate the success. And people don't study that success enough. Also, you can find out if there's the aforementioned shenanigans going on.
How do we get to this position of success? Shenanigans or virtues?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you for wrapping up the Fast Five. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries, all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifers Academy, on the zoerouth.com website. See you there. Okay, so back to my juicy questions for you. And this one I think is really important. In terms of meta thinking and meta leadership, one of the things that you talk about in the book is context and systemic forces. And I know from my work with helping leaders develop systems thinking and being able to see context that this is actually an advanced leadership maturity skill and framework. How do you get people to be able to see context and systemic forces?
Well, I think that the context piece is that you get them to pay attention to the context using their senses. The higher up you go as a leader, the more information comes at you. There's a deluge. There's information, there's lies, there's distortions. It's like what is that Steve Jobs phrase, reality distortion field. So going back to the anthropologist image, I encourage leaders to get out of their office and walk around in very informal ways, as well as, sometimes they do these ceremonial visits to the field. That's okay, but guess what? They're ready for you. They knew you were coming. One CEO, I suggested he do this, and he said, well, I can't walk around the stores. And I said, yes, you can. Because guess what? The people that work in the stores don't all know who you are. He was shocked. So that's a way to understand context. Once you develop a habit of being observant, it usually takes moving you out of your usual environment. But once you develop that and you see the benefits, then you're able to do it in more ordinary circumstances. The systemic forces, I think you have to look at patterns. And for a leader, it can be challenging when they see something wrong, something that's pretty terribly wrong. It can be difficult not to react to that one thing immediately. But I think the question always is this thing that's wrong widespread or not? Is this isolated or not? And at the same, for anything that goes on in the organization, what are the things that recur? And then what are the beliefs that, if you look at the patterns of beliefs, that gets at the systemic forces that are harder to detect. And those are the ones those are just harder to deal with. But you can notice, why are people doing that thing over and over?
Yeah. I think it's really useful to think about that in terms of looking at patterns and the beliefs underneath them. I'm working with leaders and their team at the moment, and the leader is frustrated with their staff because they believe that the staff are exhibiting signs of entitlement, and the balance between what the company offers and what the employees give back seems out of kilter from her point of view. She's a business owner. And she's like, I don't know what to do about it. I see this selfishness and this entitlement stuff. So if we apply your principles to that particular issue, where do we start? Do we ask the first question, what's your evidence about that? Or where would you go with that?
I would say something like, well, tell me what you're noticing that leads you to that conclusion. That's a little softer way to ask that question. What are you noticing? Because unfortunately, there's these memes that we get, they sort of infiltrate our brains. It's like, well, millennials are entitled and, they all want to wear flip-flops to work. And it's like, every generation, when we're young, we tend to be idealistic. We tend to have kind of uncalibrated views of things. And of course, they have a lot to say about us too, right? So I would ask her that. And I would ask her things like, what is it specifically that you're being asked to do or asked to provide that leads you to feel, it sounds like she's feeling almost taken advantage of, so I would check that out. Gosh, does this feel like they're trying to take advantage of you? And I would find that out. And then I'd go from there. Okay.
That's really helpful. And depending on what evidence comes forward in that conversation, one of the things I would be interested in doing is actually asking the team members, what are your beliefs and expectations around what an employer and a place of work should be and do for the employee? And to surface that directly. Would that be a useful approach or not?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it depends on what you learn from her. Sometimes a leader is perfectly capable of accurately reporting what's going on. But if you have reason to think that she doesn't, and sometimes they just don't know, which is perfect. It's perfect. Oh, I don't really know. I think it would be useful to find out. Why don't I go and talk to your direct report team or let's talk about who I should go talk to, and I can come back with you and tell you. Then we'll know for sure. Then we'll know that whatever intervention you decide upon will actually address the issue. Because leaders can, if you have bad data, bad interpretation of your data, then whatever intervention you devise, speaking in clinical terms, wrong diagnosis equals wrong prescription. But sometimes leaders get so antsy to act, that they will act on their suppositions and their assessments, which might be right, but might not be.
And their emotions.
Oh, completely. And if you feel, think about this leader, if she feels taken advantage of, that's pretty unpleasant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll eat away at you and make you resentful and grumpy and affect a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, grumpy. Yeah, for sure.
All right. I have one last big juicy question. There is a fine line between visionary and crazy, and both of them require a belief in something that is not yet proven. So how can you make sure you are being visionary and not crazy?
Well, I think we have to make room for a little crazy. That's my bias. Not at risk of life, limb, or your company, but to not allow conversations about things that we're imagining to be Imagineers, to quash that too quickly. Actually, that's the pipeline to visionary. You're cutting off, you're pinching the hose, and you're saying to people, shut up. That sounds crazy. We're going to send you to the mental health person, or whatever. I think you can allow some crazy talk, and then you can put it through the funnel and say, which of these ideas do we think we could figure out how to do that would be of service to our customers or of value to, whatever it is. I always say to leaders, constantly be connecting what you're doing to why you're doing it. That's really important. But the other thing is to allow the crazy ideas to live somewhere on a shelf or on a bulletin board or something. If we think back to Arthur C. Clarke and what he talked about, I think it was in the 60s, on the Australian Broadcasting Company, by the way, the reference is in my book, he talked about there will come a day when people will have computers in their house and you'll be able to work from anywhere, and grown-ups at the time thought, this guy is nuts, And he did end up living in Ceylon, Sri Lanka now. He was kind of an unusual guy. He was visionary. What can be visionary can also look crazy. Now, if the crazy is, there are aliens who come into our office at night and, delete our important files, that person needs to go to the hospital.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Yeah.
That's delusional.
Yeah. Crazy ideas aren't necessarily delusional.
Yeah, okay. So on that note, Elon Musk, visionary or crazy?
Both.
Okay, now you have to explain that.
I think we have to say he's visionary. He does things out ahead. I think the crazy part of him, I'm not saying he's insane. I think the crazy part of him is that he tends to bring ideas into the light of day very early. And it makes him subject to criticism when they don't work out or they don't work out soon enough or things like that. I think the other thing that brings discredit upon him is his extreme way of expressing himself, and being critical. And he's very dichotomous. My whole book is around the power of not dichotomizing, being a synthesizer. And as much as he's a synthesizer in a technical sense to create the Tesla and to create other things, he's very black and white and dichotomous thinking when it comes to people opposing him and things like that. He's chosen Linda Yaccarino to be the new CEO of Twitter. And in her, he's made a very wise choice. She's a very experienced ad executive. She was the chairman of NBC Universal for media sales, running a huge business, highly respected, not nearly as impulsive as he is, but still, very engaged, but a very thoughtful woman. And in the U.S., the news is all about how long will she last. And I think people are underestimating how tough she is. His choice of her was very wise and not at all crazy.
Yes, he's definitely agent provocateur. And
yes.
Thank you for
oui,
sharing.
madame.
That's right. Agent provocateur. There we go. Bit of French accent in there.
There you go. You did it well.
Constance, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and insight. It has been really fun and brilliantly insightful, and I've enjoyed it immensely. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It was fun, and you provoked my thinking in a really good way. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Well, that was super fun. I really enjoyed that conversation with Constance. And our big take action and takeaway, I think, from that conversation is what makes you think that? To be asking that question of yourself and to others, I think is really useful. That sort of press pause and go, whoa, how did I come to actually have that point of view is essential. That's putting the X-ray to our thinking and helps us dismantle some of our assumptions and unpack our beliefs. So what makes you think that is the take action? This week's tip is from my very first book, Composure, How Centered Leaders Make the Biggest Impact, produced in 2015. I can't believe it's been that long already. And it's actually quite a lovely little book. At some point, I might do a rewrite of it. Not sure. But in any case, this tip is from the book, the part of the book where we talk about resolving shadow, the stuff that we all fall into the habit of, the stuff that we're not proud of, basically. That's our shadow. We have a capacity for doing yucky stuff. And shadow is coming to terms with that and knowing that within us, we always have the capability of being a jerk and other things. So this is about entering the dragon's lair, i.e. where things aren't so great, and facing your shadow side. And it's a series of questions. I thought, well, this is good reflective practice based on Constance's interview today. So this is what you'd be asking when we're going into the dragon's lair and resolving our shadow. First of all, the pain. Where have I hurt, disappointed, let myself or others down? Yeah, squirmy discomfort right there. The next part is release. Am I ready to let this go? Am I ready to let this go? The meaning. What did I make this mean? And I think the other odd question, which is not in the book that could go with that, is what could this mean for me? Then to reorient, what do I want instead? And being positively focused about what we can learn from this, make use of our regret. And the last piece is invite. Invite support and new perspective. So that is your step-by-step way to help resolve shadow. All right. Up next on the show, we have Catherine Lazaruk, and she will be talking about executive presence, which actually is a nice segue from composure, which is all about executive presence and how we can show up centered. So I'm really looking forward to that interview with you. Actually, next week is a solo-sode, and then it's Catherine, but that's what we've got coming up. And we also are in the middle of our July giveaway. So if you want to have a listen to my near future dystopian sci-fi, it's not that dystopian actually, but there are elements of dystopia in it, about how we can live on the moon and the process by which a group of world designers go about putting together their world design and all the shenanigans, to use Constance's words, that come into play as people compete to be the first builders on the moon. That is the Olympus Project, and it's full of higher order leadership thinking principles and what comes into play when we are working and designing in cohort in collaboration with others. Anyway, the audiobook, I have some, what are they called? Passes to Spotify where you can listen to the book for free. And if you want to get access to that, all you need to do is share what you think about the podcast on social media, specifically Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram, and tag me so that I know that you've done it. And in which case I will reach out to you and send you a code where you can, that's the word I was looking for, code to download the audiobook of the Olympus Project on Spotify. I've got less than 100, so if you want one, be sure to do that. And if I don't respond to you immediately, email me, Zoe@ZoeRouth, and let me know that you've done it so I can get the link to you. All right, so that is what's exciting in the world of Zoe Routh, Planet Zoe, and the Olympus Project. So in the meantime, have a wonderful week, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.